All right, we're at 3 minutes after, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Lydia Hamilton. I'm the Director of Operations with the Wikimedia Foundation. And what I'd like to do before we kick off this discussion is we're going to do a small round of introductions with some of our staff that's on. And then I'm going to walk you through kind of our background and intention for this roundtable today. And then from there, I will be handing it over to our moderator. So in particular, we're going to start off with just some introductions from myself, which you already know me now, from Deb, and also from Greg. We'll have them intro, and then just as a FYI, so you all know as well, Tom and Danielle are on. They're going to be taking notes during this conversation. Tom will be in Etherpad, and Danielle's going to be taking notes in Google Doc. And but if you would like to join in taking the notes or adding to anything in the Etherpad, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So let's start off with Deb and Greg introducing themselves, and then I will walk us through prep for this roundtable today.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Deb Tankersley. I've been with the foundation since January 2016. So it's been a little bit of a rock and roll and ride, but it's also good. I started in getting into the sustainability space within the foundation in 2017 when I moved over to technology, and we actually started a program because it was right after the board resolution that said basically we need to do better. So that's how I got started on it. I'm certainly super happy to be here, and I get more passionate about it as the day goes on.
And my name is Gregory Varnum. I'm a senior strategist within the communications team, within the communications department, which I apologize for how confusing that sounds, but that's our setup right now. I'll be facilitating once Lydia is done with the introductions and the setup, and we'll do a little facilitating introduction then. But for now, just to introduce myself, I've been with the foundation for about 5 years in the communications department, and have been within the movement and different volunteer capacities for about 15 years. And first heard some of the sustainability, or myself, I know they were happening well before this, but myself first heard the sustainability discussions about 10 years ago when that kind of got onto people's blip screens, and then it's really blossomed from there, and have sort of taken a real interest in watching that progress within the movement and within the foundation, and now serve as one of the folks within the communications department who liaisons with this effort and tries to support it as best we can. So with that, I'll pass back over to Lydia.
Awesome, thank you, both of you. So the first thing I'll do is just give a little bit of a background on the Sustainability Consortium and why it was formed and how we all ended up here today in this conversation. And then I'll hand it back to Greg. So the Sustainability Consortium within the foundation was formed just last year. As many of you know, we've now published 2 carbon footprints for the foundation. And in our publishing last year, we wanted to establish a consortium that would allow staff that are passionate and interested in this topic to be able to gather and discuss and participate in projects, suggest ideas that can help us move the needle on carbon neutrality for the foundation and beyond. And so we've created that consortium. And now for the first time this year, we have a full year of programming that we have planned. So we released on the sustainability meta page and also on Commons an image of our entire roadmap for the year. And Deb, by chance, if you have it handy, if you could drop it in the chat. This is our roadmap on what we're intending to do for sustainability. And so our other commitment was that we wanted to find a way to be engaged with the community on this work and to partner with us. And so engagement or membership in the consortium, if you wanted it, you're here now, you are a member, you're a part of us. Community participation in the consortium can happen through a number of different ways. One is through our edit-a-thons that we're now going to be hosting quarterly. We have one that is going on today. We also have these roundtable discussions that we intend to host quarterly. And then there will be other one-off events that we'd like to schedule, hopefully once things start to shift a bit more with the current pandemic circumstances. So our intent for today is that we just kind of wanted to open up the doors to conversation with everyone. But I want to set just some expectations for the conversation. This is our first time doing this, and so we're going to learn through this experience together. And I want to be transparent in sharing that, you know, anything that is suggested or ideas that are shared here, please don't consider those kind of set in stone or final. We're in active dialogue and discussion on this. And so if there are ideas that are proposed for the foundation to explore, we will, you know, evaluate those. And if it's something that we can move forward on, we'll do some investigation and we'll share that back with you. Our intention is that we want to update our meta page on work that's happening within the foundation at least once a quarter. And then through these roundtables as well, we can share information with you on work that's underway. And pretty much, I think that's it. I want to give opportunity to Deb just to add anything else before I hand over to Greg.
I think you covered it all really well. We're, you know, other than we're really excited to do this, we're, you know, loving the fact that we can actually have this conversation. You know, virtually, would have loved to have been doing this at Wikimania. That's just not going to happen this year. So, but it doesn't mean we can't stop talking. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you to Deb and Lydia for setting up the framework and getting out the background information to help us get this conversation going. Just going to set a couple quick reminders for everybody that was sent in the email. As with generally all foundation events, we are using the friendly space policy. You know, looking at this crowd, I'm not terribly concerned about that, but I'm just offering that as a friendly standard reminder that that is the policy structure that we use to guide these discussions in terms of conduct. And then we're going to be going over 2 questions today. I am, as a facilitator, will be going over the questions and then helping move conversation forward. If there are things that come up that we're just not able to go over in this meeting because we just don't have the information yet or whatnot, I may, you know, point that out to try to keep us on topic. But otherwise, we really want to hear what folks' thoughts are on these 2 questions. So with that, I will let folks, just a reminder, we've got the Etherpad open. You can post in there. We also have the YouTube chat that we are monitoring, and we have the chat here in Zoom that we are monitoring. So any of those 3 places, we're keeping an eye on those. So if you post something there, it should get its way to me, and I'll try to bring it forward. So with that, I will jump into our first question, and I will basically read the question. We'll then have some time for discussion. I will give pauses to make sure we have time. So if there feels like an awkward silence, that is intentional, as I want to make sure we give people a time to speak. So just calling that out, that's always a little awkward for me as a communications person. I'm not a huge fan of long silences, but we intentionally do that. So I just wanted to prepare people for those silences in case you hear them. So with that, I want to jump into our first question. So the first of 2 questions we're going to go over today is, should the Wikimedia Foundation's annual carbon footprint calculations disregard emissions that are compensated by its vendors through carbon credits or emission certificates? So again, should the foundation's annual footprint calculations disregard emissions that are compensated by our vendors through carbon credits or other methods such as emission certificates? So with that, I will open the floor to anyone who wants to chime in. And again, if you type in a response, I'll read that out for you.
And I want to jump in real quickly. If you don't understand any of those, the question or you know, want more information, we're happy to expand on that as well.
And in full transparency, none of us are environmental experts. So we will do our best to explain it, but with the caveat that follow-up research and citations is always recommended and appreciated.
I'll start. Hi everyone, my name is Cassie Casares. I was an environmental studies major at University of San Francisco, and I read an article about carbon credits that a lot of corporations would do to incentivize their production and whatever they were creating. But I would say no, personally, just based off for-profit companies that are emitting carbon emissions, because it incentivizes the public to allow, I guess, an okay to keep on producing carbon, even though as a nonprofit tech company, we're going to do that regardless because of our computers, like that's already extracting natural resources from the earth, and then flying across the world because we all meet each other globally, and then what's the other one? Oh, our data centers. So that's bound to happen. I think in retrospect, I think we should have it to let the public know, the community know that we're trying to be like conscious of the carbon emissions that we're doing, but I think there needs to be an offset to the carbon that we're emitting. So at least giving something back to the community in terms of how do we take back the carbon emissions that we've produced. So in terms of like maybe some type of community projects, not just like edit-a-thons, also like edit-a-thons obviously because transfer knowledge is like our work that we're doing, but in terms of maybe doing something that gives back to the earth so that we can offset those carbon emissions that we are producing.
So if I understand the question correctly, and thank you, Cassie, for kind of opening up bravely the conversation. For me, I think we should be thinking about increasing our standard for the carbon credits, because we know that a lot of carbon credits coming out of corporate strategies may or may not meet the same ethical standard or system that the foundation and the movement wants to put behind credits. So like, and even the approach, like we offset the all hands meeting, the travel for the all hands meeting, Lydia, I remember you saying that. And for me, even the kind of corporation we were working for that, for the offsets was not my standard of one. So for me, I would love to see us creating a standard by which we would like offsets to do, and maybe even purchase secondary ones, right? Like purchase a second set of offsets, because the foundation, compared to other kinds of organizations in the same situation, has a relative access to resources in this kind of setting, and carbon offsets aren't that expensive if done, and can be done quite well and quite systematically, but some of them end up being like carbon capture and storage programs, or some of these other practices that just like further industrial carbon production, like Cassie was saying, right? Which is like exactly the industries we want to move away from, right? And like the whole point of sustainability in this sense is shifting kind of global systems and economic systems. And so we should really be investing in like actual green energy installation, maybe microgrid work in places where energy growth needs to happen, but is not like, I know a lot of communities in West Africa and India are being well served by programs that install electricity directly on the ground, and there are carbon offset strategies being worked there. Full carbon capture and soil credits, like there's like much more direct work that we could be doing, and even if our vendor is buying credits that may not meet our standards, so like having that system in place, or that philosophy in place, would be great.
Can I ask a follow-up question, and Greg, tell me if I'm breaking moderation rules. So okay, cool. I want to unpack what you mean by increasing our standards a little bit more. Just tactically, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so the carbon credit industry has had a complex, weird history in relationship to the activist ecosystem, right? And there are different philosophies and approaches to it. Many of them are okay in terms of practice, but there's also like and I haven't done a huge amount of research on this, but I've been listening to a series of kind of energy focused podcasts and other sector kind of conversations about this. And there seems to be like a emergent set of things that are investing in new technologies that actually capture carbon. And actually like transition, like say farmers or other kinds of industries away from carbon intensive industry, right? And there's some that just reinforce the kind of existing industrial practices of carbon intensive industry, right? And having a philosophy or strategy or choice making system that we apply to it, and then we say, hey vendor, which one are you buying from? Are they just investing in carbon capture and storage? That's not what that may not be what we want, or are we doing direct air capture from like, you know, natural gas or coal plants? That's really not as that doesn't shift the economy related to this. So I don't know, and again, this might be something we'd want to explore. Like we would want to have a conversation about this. We'd want to decide what our philosophy is.
Got it. How that translated to me was we should do more exploration around the specific projects that we would be investing in if we were to purchase offsets, to make sure that we're not doing, make sure that we're not purchasing offsets that are going to continue to, you know, worsen the carbon situation.
And if our vendors are purchasing ones that we don't quite agree with, buy redundant ones, right? So that we actually are putting our money and resources where our mouth is and working on our carbon backlog, right? Like there may be different ways of accounting this. I know Microsoft put out a goal to like reduce all of its carbon it's ever emitted over its lifetime, right? And they're doing that by investing in increased energy use and that kind of stuff.
All right, so just to summarize kind of what I'm hearing so far, it sounds like the sentiment is acknowledging what the vendors are doing, but being very transparent in our documentation about, you know, what it is happening absent the vendors' actions, what our footprint would be, you know, without their supplemental efforts, but also documenting how they are doing it, so both the foundation and the community can kind of make an assessment on if we want to go further than that. That's kind of what I'm hearing. I think that's what I'm hearing. If I am wrong and that's what I'm hearing, please let me know, but I think that's what I'm hearing. All right, any other, we've lots of time, so I want to make sure folks have thoughts. All right, Lucas, go ahead.
So I'll take this chance. So the blog post that we published in August says, from 2018 to 2019, our carbon footprint decreased 7.66% overall, largely due to data center improvements that resulted in lower emissions. And so a person reading this will say, wow, cool, they flew less, or their data center switched to solar energy or to wind power, or they programmed their servers to use less runtime or become more efficient. But when you look at the actual numbers, and Deb, thank you so much for providing additional information on this. What actually happened is none of the above. We didn't fly less, we flew more. We did improve our data center efficiency a little bit, but that's not what caused the 7.66 decrease from 2018 to 2019. Our data center did not switch from solar power or to wind power. What they did, they went somewhere online and bought sustainability or emission certificates and put that into their sustainability reports that got fed into our vendor that created our report. And that's what happened. And that may be okay in the long run. It may set the right incentive because, of course, those emission certificates, they do show up in the balance sheet of our vendors. They make their service more expensive for them, so to speak, and they might incentivize the actual switch to sustainable energy for them, or something like that. Or they might help or finance sustainability efforts by planting trees or by getting carbon out of the air or something like that. But I want us, when we fly more, I want us to say we flew more, we burned more carbon. I want us to tell people that and be super honest and super upfront about that. Because, you know, corporations like Google are now issuing press releases saying we became carbon negative. It's like, Google is becoming carbon negative? Are Google CEOs not flying anymore? No, they're still flying. They're still burning jet fuel like crazy. And the Google data centers are still running on coal power on gas plants in Texas and in Pennsylvania. It's still happening. And how can they then put out that press release, Google is becoming carbon negative? Please, come on. This is not what's happening. Maybe let's say Google is trying to burn less carbon, and it's also financing, you know, climate mitigation efforts. That's what I'm okay with saying or with hearing. And that's the kind of language that I want us to talk, want us to use. I want us to at least, you know, publish 2 figures disregarding carbon offsets. This is what comes out. And if we take into account carbon offsets, this is what comes out. But when I started looking into this, our carbon footprint and how we can reduce it in Wikimania, one of the first people that I spoke to were the folks at Greenpeace USA in 2016. And I still have those emails, and I pulled them up. And they told me, do what Facebook has been doing, for example, and this is what caused the Wikimedia Foundation board statement, or the thing they adopted, some kind of pledge. And I modeled that after what the Facebook board had adopted. Because Greenpeace USA told me to follow the Facebook example. But they said there's one thing that you should not be following in what Facebook and the Googles and the Microsofts and all these organizations are doing. Do not drink the carbon offset Kool-Aid. Do not buy that lie. Or at least, and that's a compromise I'm open to talking about today, if we are buying that lie from our vendors, then we are at least disclosing it when we are publishing our numbers. That's what I'm open to. But I'm not gonna buy the Equinix numbers in what their emissions are of the CyrusOne numbers, because the Equinix and CyrusOne CEOs went to the Obama White House 6 years ago and signed a paper in the Oval Office saying, we will invest heavily in wind power and coal power. And then the Trump administration came along, and the Equinix and CyrusOne CEO forgot about the paper they signed in the Oval Office 6 years ago. And they did not invest in solar power. They did not invest in wind power. What they're doing now is they're buying maybe Russian, Siberian tree planting initiative, or some shady carbon emission certificates, and they are putting that into their balance sheets, and that's where they're feeding us. And please, that's not what can happen. I'm very much in support. Sorry, I'll stop in 1 second, but sorry, this is like, yeah, it's so much on my mind right now. We should raise our standards with regard to what kind of emission certificates we would even accept. And I very much support Alex's point on this. And if we accept them at all, we need to make like a footnote. By the way, this figures is with CO2 emission certificates, without it would be this and that. I want us to be transparent about this. Thank you. And sorry for taking up so much time.
I'd like to chime in if I can. Lucas, thanks for sharing and being transparent with that. The first thing around being transparent about the numbers, we are earnestly striving towards that. One of the changes that we made with our report this year And to be fully honest, we had to make this change after the report was completed and go back and change it again, was the way that travel was being reflected. It wasn't easy to understand. Even us internally, as we would talk about it every time, we're like, what's included in this bucket? What's in this other scope? I'm like, I don't even understand. So we went back, Deb and myself partnered with the travel team to kind of untangle that web a little bit. And so that led to us expressing the carbon footprint of all the travel stuff way clearer than we did the previous year. So I think that that was a small win for us. When you say don't buy the lie from the vendors, I can respect that statement. We are being fully transparent. It's like when we create our footprints, we reach out to them and we rely on the information that they provide us with. And whatever is the story that they share for an increase or a decrease, we carry that message forward transparently as well. So the message that we shared in the footprint around them making changes to their grid was what they shared with us. And so we passed that message on. But if through deeper research, we find that there was something different that they did, which I think you're proposing, or you may have found that they have bought some offsets, and then it's kind of questionable about what the offsets we're supporting. I guess what I'm trying to say is every time we know better, we do better. So when we knew better about the travel, we made corrections about the travel. When we know a little bit more about the data centers, we share more information about the data centers. It has not been a hidden fact that we're trying to figure out, like, how do we navigate this conversation with our data centers? It's not easy for us to just pick up and go somewhere else or to create our own entire data center, because there's other contingencies that we have in terms of accessibility to like the internet and speed and redundancy and all that good stuff. And we want to ensure that we have a product and websites that continue to perform well. And so a lot of that is geographically decided. But nonetheless, when we learn more, we try to share more. And so in your request for us to be transparent, I don't think you're going to find us trying to do anything other than that as it relates to this footprint. The more that we can find out, the more we will definitely share. And I appreciate your willingness to kind of co-sign what Alex was suggesting, that if we're going to explore the credits, let's be very clear on the projects that they're supporting and be transparent in sharing that with everyone. So that's my response to it.
Yeah, can I make a tiny footnote? One example that we can look at that is probably very easy to understand. Our Singapore caching center, the EQSIN one. We know for a fact that 100.0% of all energy consumed, of all electrical energy consumed in the state of Singapore comes from gas, burning gas. And year on year, 2018, 2019, Equinix is reporting a 65.62% decrease of our emissions for the Singapore caching centers. How can that be if we know for a fact 100% of all of electricity in the state of Singapore comes from gas? It cannot be that they somehow installed some rooftop solar or something on that server farm. And so, like, this is something we shouldn't be accepting, or at least we should be disclosing that decrease doesn't work. It doesn't add up. It must come from emission certificates, and we don't know which ones these are.
I think with that one, it was because the Singapore data center is actually fairly new. It's only 2 years old, I think it is. And so for the first report, I think we literally just used what's available, in generality. And then the second year, we were actually able to get concrete data. And I believe that's what happened with that. Because it is a very new data center.
So it's not a good example. We need another one. Maybe Texas, I don't know. But I don't know.
Well, I think, for the sake of time, my impression is that there is, while we can go for hours and hours over some specifics, it sounds like there's general consensus that moving forward, we want to continue to be transparent, and that to the specific question of should we factor in the vendor credits, it sounds like essentially the sentiment is in the sense that we make people aware that they exist, but that we also transparently share what those credits, how those credits factored in. So my kind of takeaway on the question is that essentially it's not so simple as do we take that as a credit so much as we articulate transparently how those credits are being factored in, as it seems as to be the takeaway I'm hearing from conversations here. Lucas, 2 minutes, and then I want to make sure we have time to move on to the next question.
But one question I have, when we ask Equinix about what are your emissions, can't we ask them what are your emissions without and with certificates? Is that not questions we can ask them?
To be honest, we've never asked it both ways. Normally, when we produce the footprint, we ask them to provide us with their emissions purely as the way that they stated. We have not asked a counter question for the with and without. So we could certainly ask the question. It doesn't guarantee that we'll get the response, but I'm willing to explore that.
And I think, just to be
I'd like to work with someone honest enough to give all the data. Like if someone's not transparent, like why should we trust them?
Well, so I want to give 2 quick responses, then we'll move on to the next question, just for sake of transparency for Foundation. I think one, a reminder that when the Foundation is compiling these reports, we're working with an outside entity who is, an expert in this area. This is not an area that, the Foundation has expertise in, and we're not going to pretend that we do. We're writing these reports. That's a really legitimate question. We should be asking those questions. And I think moving forward, we absolutely will ask those questions. As to why we haven't asked those questions to this point, to be honest, this isn't our area of expertise. We've been relying on experts, and I can't speak to why people who write these reports for a living don't think to answer those questions. That's a very legitimate question to ask them, but we're not them, so I can't speak for them. The thing I will offer though on the vendors is, they have answered the questions that we have asked them. I think to associate that they are perhaps withholding things from us is maybe suggesting some nefariousness that may not be there. To be fair to them, they do give us the information we ask for. I think the way that is asked needs to be reviewed. So I think moving forward, that's kind of the takeaway is absolutely we should be asking those follow-up questions as to why it hasn't happened. No one's asked us to, and the experts we work with, that wasn't how they framed them. But I think on the vendor side, I suspect if we ask those questions, they will provide it. If they don't, absolutely, should be a very legitimate conversation as to why they're not sharing that information once we ask for it. But I think that they haven't given it to us so far is largely because they get this request from dozens and dozens of entities, all of whom kind of work on these reports in a similar format, and it's just not follow-up questions apparently anyone's ever thought to ask them, which is I can't speak to why that hasn't been asked. Lydia, does that sound correct to you though, as to it just hasn't come up yet because in talking with our experts, they've never thought to ask that follow-up question either?
Yeah, it's just being entirely honest. And I think just to make sure that I know what the exact differences of the question so that we can get to the next one, because we have a hard stop at 45 minutes after the hour. So Lucas, you're asking that when we get our emissions reports from them, that they share both with and without the application of the credits.
Just bring it all to the Wiki community and let the Wiki community on Wiki in the usual way ask the questions that they want to ask. And the Wiki community can evaluate these reports in open on the Wiki in the way that Wiki community conversations happen.
So that is going to be a little bit more challenging. So, and I don't even want to say it's going to be more challenging. It's something that we would not be doing.
Okay, if this is a Wikimedia Foundation thing, that's one thing. If it's a community thing, that's another thing. It's fine if it's a Media Foundation decision.
Yeah, so Wayne, if I can just respond to you. So the reason that we would not be coming to the community on getting input on the Foundation footprint is because it is purely just a Foundation footprint. It is not meant to, yeah, okay, so cool. I'm gonna stop right there. I'm not gonna go any further. Yeah, it's just a Foundation footprint. Now, in the spirit of what Lucas is saying, like us improving the transparency of the information that's being shown, when we put together that report and we publish it to you, it's helpful for us to know what are the questions that we aren't asking that would surface the information that would be of interest to you. And so that even those two questions, Lucas, are something that we, it's easy for us to take action on that now. And through the vehicle of us having roundtables like this, we can open up the conversation and even get your input. So to me, it's a step in the right direction.
All right, so in consideration of time, if you do have other follow-up thoughts on this, I don't want to stifle conversation, so we can certainly either continue to set a future roundtable. If you've got an interest, just ping us and let us know, or if you want some more time to talk about this in depth. Again, I don't want to give any impression at all that we're trying to stifle any of the conversation. We absolutely want to have this conversation, but in consideration of time, I want to move on to the next question. So the next question, should the Wikimedia Foundation commit to offsetting its carbon footprint by buying emission certificates? If yes, should this option be viewed and clearly communicated as an intermediary solution towards reducing its carbon footprint? So again, should the foundation commit to offsetting our footprint by buying emission certificates? And if yes, should this be viewed as a temporary solution while reducing our overall carbon footprint?
I'll start with this one because I can be very quick. I'm super open. I have no idea whether or not we should be doing this. But I have a very clear position on the second one. If, then it must be clearly a step, an intermediary step, and must be clearly communicated as such, because that's what corporations like Google are not doing. Like, we should be, if we do it, then we are trying to fly less, and on the way to flying less, we'll make it more expensive for our departments to have their people fly. This is how I want us to communicate about this if we are doing this.
I just want to ask a clarifying question. I don't know if I followed that all, Lucas, the travel tie into this. Can you just repeat again?
Oh, okay, so if the Wikimedia Foundation decides that we will be buying emission certificates for all the carbon emissions that we cause, it becomes more expensive for any department of the Wikimedia Foundation to have one of their staff members fly. So departments and teams across the Wikimedia Foundation will be more reluctant to have their staff travel because it hurts their budget more, because they have to buy the flight ticket and the hotel plus the emission certificate. So it becomes more, so they get disincentivized from having their staff fly. And this is one of the mechanisms of how certificates work in an organization like ours. But whether this is how we operate or want to operate, I don't know. But if we do, let's be super clear that we see this as an intermediary strategy.
Thank you. I understand now.
I mean, my quick answer is yes, we should be offsetting it until we can get to a point where we are, reducing it or eliminating emissions. That it is much better not to have the emissions, but if they do exist, I don't know anything better at this point other than offsetting it. And I'm open to other ideas if people know better, but in absence of any other ideas on how to better compensate for the emissions we're creating, offsets seem like something we should be doing as we, as Lucas said, move towards a world where we are emitting less.
I'll just come out and say, no, we shouldn't buy these. There are alternatives to offsetting. The strength of the Wikipedia community is in publishing an encyclopedia. One of the things that we can do instead of offsetting is fund communities in various parts of the world to develop Wikipedia articles about environmentalism and even the idea of carbon offsets. Most of the world wouldn't know what this means. There's not Wikipedia articles in every language for this concept. And this is our strength. Why should we as a nonprofit organization give our money to another nonprofit organization to counter climate change through someone else's model? And there's all kinds of issues that come up with this model. The entire idea of carbon offsetting was developed by corporate America to diffuse the blame for what they're doing to the environment. We don't need to buy into this corporate system, or if we do, it should be part of a community conversation.
Wayne, can I just chime in on that really quickly? I appreciate you sharing that. because when we started to explore what were some of the projects that we wanted to embark on this year, one of them is around partnerships. Because there is a specific, and it's been noted in a number of different occasions that there's a direct correlation between carbon reduction and increased education on the topic. And so there are some members of the community and the feedback that we've seen just on the talk page alone that are open to that. Like, yes, we should be investing in things that are going to increase education, that will increase content on this topic. And there are others that feel as though, no, it's not directly enough impacting the carbon emission itself. It's too distant from it. And so they're competing thoughts on it, but we definitely want to explore the education piece here because it does fit directly with our mission.
I think so too. We should consider selling carbon credits. People should give us money to produce environmental information in Wikipedia articles and Wikidata and everything else. And instead of buying them from someone else, people should buy them from us.
Yeah, I think it's for me, Lane, as someone who is on the program side of this and would be responsible for implementing, if we went down this line of like investing in the community part of it, or at least being a partner in implementing something like that, there's a couple things to note. It should be a both and like we can do both. The foundation is not, again, we have resources at the moment. We're resourced in a moderately good way, and our grants programs are in the process of reforming themselves. So there's a lot of opportunities for like us to imagine new ways to apply grants to do things like you're saying, right? Invest in specific topic areas, invest in specific regions, invest in all kinds of other stuff. I'm not on that team, so like I can't tell you what their current thinking is. But they're definitely like in conversation with those of us who do community organizing, like interested in that. I think where the movement could help the foundation make this decision on investing in those areas is by showing up in the movement strategy discussions and highlighting that topics for impact, which is a movement strategy mandate that we need to respond to as the foundation, includes things like climate change, includes things like the Sustainable Development Goals, needs to prioritize those in the process, because we need to, the current organizing around climate content and sustainable development content and movement is quite small. Like we have good efforts happening. There's a big editathon by a movement partner happening next week on the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's still not, it's a new practice. And so we need both the movement to say this is a priority, we need practice doing it, we need examples of what works and what doesn't, because these are highly specific topics. And that's something like I personally commit to helping support. And like I would love to see the foundation grow that capacity, and I'm one of the partners that Lydia talked about and like exploring that, right? So I just wanted to like highlight there's an opportunity here, but we need a both and approach, and some pressure or attention from the movement on these topics and organizing them would be really great, because that helps us make the case internally too. Like this has impact. We know it has impact because people are already doing it.
All right, and then for the sake of time, we are at time, but we're going to allow more time for this conversation to continue if folks are interested. If you do need to jump off, we're not going to think you were mean to us and left. We recognize this was the time we had allocated, but we don't want to stifle the conversation, and the three facilitators are able to stay longer. So if you have more you want to share, please do.
I've got a request of Alex and of everyone else. I'd like more transparency from the Wikimedia Foundation about funding for environmental initiatives. So you would be transparent about your carbon credits, but supposing the Wikimedia Foundation were to fund community groups around the world to address the Sustainable Development Goals or do environmental projects, it's very hard for the Wiki community to find out how much money and resources are available for these kinds of things. These aren't a conventional part of the financial reports as of today. This isn't just an environmental issue. We also don't know how much money is going to women's issues, or we don't even have reports of how much money is going to particular countries or regions. The Wiki community can organize, but it's mostly in the dark about how much resources are available. We also don't know when the Wikimedia Foundation is hiring staff to coordinate different kinds of programs or what kind of labor allocations are available to these. Like, for example, if there's any Wikimedia Foundation staff who are appointed with a certain amount of labor hours to do things related to the environment, knowing that information would help the Wiki community to organize its own programs. Because as we're planning things as volunteers, if we don't know what the direction of investment and labor allocation is, it's hard for us to coordinate anything. And with you guys having staff and administration and actually being paid to do these kinds of things, I would rather you guys be more transparent and not put the burden of labor on the volunteers to try to figure out these kinds of things. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'd like to respond to both of those. From the funding piece, we know that there's a variety of different grants that exist that you could apply for. Rapid, project, annual, conference, all of these are different flavors of grants that we have in the organization right now. And none of them are explicitly focused on one particular topic or another, which means that if you wanted to get funding for environmental projects within the community, you could apply for a grant in any of those spaces, and are welcome to do so. Now, my area of overview, or not overview, my like area of responsibility from a grants perspective includes events, which would be conference grants. So if there were a larger event, and obviously we know we're still very much so in a pandemic, if there were a larger event that you wanted to have and you wanted to get people together to talk about this, work on this in some capacity, please apply for a conference grant. I can tell you that at least 75 to 80% of the requests that are submitted get funded. It's very rare that we reject a request. And if we were to reject one, we give you explicit guidance and feedback as to why that was the case. So there is funding. So I encourage you to apply if you have something of interest. The other thing around staff and labor availability, this I want to be very transparent on, because we don't have a lot of hours that are allocated to this in the foundation right now, but it is something that is a focus for us. The goal around sustainability and our seeking carbon neutrality, that accountability sits in the operations department, but we partner with multiple teams across the org to work on that. So to explicitly state like how much time or how many hours do we have, like it's hard to put like an exact number to it, but we do have staff that it is a part of their job to work on efforts related to this. What that transparently means is that this is no one's full-time job at the foundation right now. It is something that we have explored and we've talked about. Right now, being honest, I don't think that there is enough going on in the foundation related to this work to justify a full-time body being dedicated to it. But we're going to continue to work to offer, outlets like this and beyond to move the needle in this space. And once it gets to, the right level of work, then we would want to explore bringing in someone to be fully dedicated to this effort. So I hope that answers the question.
I just want a number. So far as I know, the best information I have is the total Wikimedia Foundation investment in environmental projects is 0. If you've got an updated accounting report by any means that you can estimate this, I would like to have it. But until and unless I get a report from the Wikimedia Foundation, all I know is 0. The best available information is 0 money is invested in environmental issues.
I just want to interject real quick that for sake of topic. So for example, this comes up a lot in the gender gap discussion. So this is a topic that goes well beyond, and I want to offer one of the reasons this gets really complicated. We almost published that number on gender gap, and we were asked very passionately by the community organizers of gender gap not to publish that number. And the reason was they felt if, as Lydia mentioned, our funding is isn't based on what we did last year. So just because we gave 25% to gender gap last year that has no bearing on where the funding is going to go this year, because again, we don't choose the focus areas, the people who apply for the grants do. And one of the concerns that the gender gap community had was that if we put that number of how much funds goes to gender gap, it might falsely give people the impression that that is where the limit is, and that it's actually under the control of the foundation and not up to the community to decide moving forward how they want to reprioritize. So I'm not offering that as a reason not to do this. I'm more offering that as this is a very complicated issue. There are a lot of very logical and passionate beliefs on both sides of this, that there's tremendous value in sharing the numbers, that there's tremendous risk in sharing the numbers, and the outcome of that is it's not something we're really going to resolve in this call. And it's also, to be completely transparent, a topic that goes well beyond the sustainability and is actually a really large grants discussion that has been happening, to my knowledge, for at least 7 years and likely will continue forward. So I just want to offer for topic continuity that I personally would think that the number would be very valuable, and that's why I've tried to share it in the past. But right on the cusp of sharing it, having the people who it was impacting the most passionately plea with me not to, I just want to interject that there's a lot of complexities on this one, and I don't think this particular initiative is going to be the one that gets conclusion on it, just to be blunt.
And kind of furthering on that too, but this is our emergent kind of program in the foundation too. So we're still figuring out like what capacities belong and what our strategy is. The thing that's been moved most directly is the operational bit that Lydia and Deb have been championing. We're still trying to figure out internally like who owns what, where, how on the community side of it, and that's kind of part of my role on the group is trying to figure out like from the program's perspective. And then in light of the COVID year, we couldn't make as ambitious of an ask internally too. So this is also a new it's a new program that didn't get as much of as ambitious of a kind of attention on it because of the constraints of our planning this year. So like we should definitely keep having this conversation. Like, what do we need? What should we do if we want to activate the community? What would it look like? Having those ideas would make it much easier for someone like myself to champion for it internally. So just like knowing concretely like what kinds of activities would be best would be helpful. And Lane, you know, I take insight and try to integrate it into our work in other spaces we've worked on too. So if you have explicit ideas, give it to me. I will see where I can find the factor in. I'm totally I agree with you entirely on the organizing bit.
All right, I think for sake of time, unless anyone else has something they really, really want to share in under 30 seconds, which if you do, awesome. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. As Lydia mentioned, this is the beginning of what we hope to be many conversations. I heard, many people speak very passionately, and I completely agree about the foundation doing this in discussions with the community, and I hope that this is an example of us beginning to do that. We agree, the discussions around carbon offsetting, we should be making that decision with community input, and that's exactly what roundtables like this are for. So that's exactly why we're doing this, is to get that input, and so we thank you very, very much for being a part of the first of what we hope will be many of these discussions. This is certainly not a topic that's going away anytime soon, both for the foundation as well as the world around us. And so it's really important. We're going to be talking about this for years to come, I have a hunch. So we really look forward to future discussions along these. Please tell your friends. Hope you had a great time. The party will continue in the future, but we hope to see this number grow and grow and grow. Thank you again for the passion you brought. If you've got follow-up thoughts on this, please reach out to us, but otherwise, keep your inboxes tuned for the next one of these. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. Bye, everyone.
It's so exciting. Thank you very much.